I want everybody, as we talk about this, take everything you think you know about emotions out of your brain and put it on the desk. And just like, let's start with a whole fresh conversation about emotions. And part of why this is a really difficult conversation for us to have is we have a vocabulary problem. And we have a vocabulary problem in part and parcel because this center is in an evolutionary shift. It's under pressure. And some of the ways in which we are learning to work with this energy and understanding this energy are changing. And so we are working from our old understanding of emotional energy and not realizing that actually we're using this energy and this energy itself in a very different, very new way. So we're going to start first with what are emotions? And I'm going to tell you that what you have probably been trained to think about as emotions are probably not, by human design definition, emotions. Most likely, everything you think about related to emotions is in some way, shape, or form connected to your sense of lovability and your relationships. So that means that when we start talking about feelings, what we're oftentimes talking about is our response to loss, especially around relationships, or our actual experience of loss of some kind, or a fear that we're going to lose some kind of relationship with love. The other emotions we generally feel are usually in some way, shape, or form related to the emotional theme for type. Okay, so start first by taking all these things that we think of as emotions off the table as well, because they're probably not emotions. They're love. They're really just permutations of love. And grief is an aspect of love, right? We lose love, or we perceive ourselves as having lost love. We don't actually really lose love, but we think it feels like we've lost some expression of love, and we grieve, or we're angry, or we're hurt, or those are not technically emotional solar plexus emotions. Okay. The second issue that we have with emotions is that we talk about them incorrectly. We train 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds to talk about feelings, but we're not really doing it correctly. We say, I am this, I am that, right? I am sad, I am scared, I am, right? Which is, by the way, also not an emotion. Scared is a splenic thing, right? It's not an emotional thing. So when we say I am a feeling, well, where does the voice of I am live in the chart? The G center, right? The I am is not emotional. And so we miscommunicate about emotions. And when we define them as I am a feeling, I am sad, we actually lock that movement of that emotional energy in place, right? We make it static instead of dynamic. And so we have to be very mindful as we make this transition into redefining emotional energy, which is why I changed it to the creative center. I took the emotional language off of the whole center because it gets so flipping confusing. You can't define yourself as a feeling. You are not a feeling. Feelings, by definition, move. And in fact, we know that, right? If we allow emotional energy to move, then we move through it, right? And if we don't allow emotional energy to move, then we hold it, right? We store it, we lock it into the body, and it becomes unhealthy, right? At a certain point, it festers and it gets heavy, and it creates, depression and anxiety and some of these other experiences. It's not the only thing that creates those, but it's one of those things. It creates a trauma response or a PTSD response. Emotional frequencies in the emotional solar plexus is about a frequency of creativity that involves the timing of your energy for the doing part. Okay? It's the emotional frequency that regulates the doing part of creativity. If you have an open emotional solar plexus, well, let me just add one other piece. This is the part that gets a little bit brain bendery, so roll with me. It's also the energy of abundance. When we use this center as our creative center, the frequency that we sustain is the frequency that's creating, calibrating is a better word, really, calibrating the magnetic monopole. That's the magnetic resonance field that lives in the G center. It's calibrating this magnetic resonance field that's calling in or manifesting or collapsing out of the quantum field, whatever word you want to use. It's calling in and programming us to experience opportunities or notice opportunities that match the frequency of our energy. So we're going to go back and just revisit this because it's so important. If you think about money and you have positive, abundant feelings about money, and when I say the word money, your brain, which gets triggered by a photon storm in response to that word, that archetype, your brain then produces neurotransmitters that match your meanings, that match your personal story about money. That those neurotransmitters then create an emotional response. So if I say money and you're like, oh my God, it's the end of the month, am I going to make rent tomorrow? Your body is going to experience emotional energy, creative energy, right? Around your personal money story. That creative energy is going to program your heart. And it's either going to program your heart and the magnetic resonance field in conjunction with it, the monopole, is going to either program the heart into a state of coherence, which is a wildly creative, attractive state, or non-coherent, which is a distressing state. It's a low stress fight or flight response, sometimes a not so low stress fight or flight response kind of a state, right? The purpose of that center is to calibrate the heart, to calibrate what you attract. It's not about, I feel all this stuff and I love you and I don't want to lose you and all that. That's not emotional solar plexus energy. That's tribal circuitry, basically, right? So when we have an open emotional solar plexus, the challenge in this center is to hold your frequency of abundance no matter what's going on around you, right? So if you're walking into the room and you're like, I don't have rent for tomorrow, but I totally know that whatever is going to happen, it's going to be the perfect solution. Everything's going to be okay. I have faith. Don't know how it's going to work out, but I have faith, right? And you walk into the room and you're like really in that high creative state. And your partner's like, oh my God, we don't have money for rent. And he's freaking out in the kitchen, right? And he has a defined solar plexus and you have an open solar plexus. Your challenge for the optimal function of that center is to walk into that room and not lose connection with your frequency of faith, right? When that center is defined, what that means is that if we think about emotional energy being a wave, right? It functions in a wave because it's a frequency, it's a moving dynamic energy. It's an energy frequency. Frequencies are called frequencies because they have frequent oscillations at different speeds, right? And at different heights. Emotional frequencies that are abundant are still moving. They're still moving. That means you're going to experience potentially all the different aspects of your narrative around money if you have a defined solar plexus or a defined creative center. And what's going to matter for you is what's the baseline of that frequency. That means even if you wake up and you're like, yeah, money. And you wake up the next day and you're like, nope, never going to have any ever, never again. And the next day you wake up like, oh, there's bajillions of dollars in my bank account. Even if you're all over the place emotionally, if you can stay consistent over the shifts of your moods and the shifts in your story, if you can stay consistent around your decision of action, no matter how your mood shifts and changes, then it's the right decision for you. So let me make that really, really simple. If you have defined emotional solar plexus, you have emotional authority or creative authority in quantum human design. What that means is that when you get an opportunity to respond, if you're a generator type, for example, if you get an opportunity to, and you respond to something, and your initial response is, yep, that has to stay over the entire cycle of your solar plexus. So you have to go through your whole personal and creative cycle And your answer has to stay consistent no matter how your mood might shift. Does that make sense? If your answer doesn't stay consistent, then that means don't do it. Because what that means is that if you enter into a relationship with whatever that opportunity is, you're going to be all over the place for the entire time you're in relationship with that opportunity. If you want to make good, clear decisions with creative authority, then you have to have a consistent answer that stays the same no matter how the mood or the internal environment shifts. That's what that means for you. Okay. And as I said, if the answer is no and it stays consistently no, don't do it. If the answer is all over the place, don't do it. This has nothing to do with momentum. In theory, if your answer is if you're a generator type, and it stays throughout the arc of the emotional wave, then you will continue to sustain your momentum no matter your mood. And when you feel like, okay, I've waited long enough and my answer is staying consistent, then you can do whatever you want. Now, let's break this down. The tricky part is if you're a manifester or an initiator type, sorry. If you're an initiator type, I think the trickiest part for the initiator type, because I find authority for the initiator type is very challenging because there's nothing external about it, is that you have to know yourself and your wave well enough to be able to read your internal emotional environment to know when it's time to act. So that clarity means that you're not getting an external signal to then sit with, you're getting an internal signal to sit with until the timing is right. For the generators, it's about responding and making sure your response stays the same over the arc of your wave. For the orchestrators, if you get an invitation and you have emotional authority or creative authority, that means you have to find that invitation to be juicy and exciting for an entire arc of your emotional wave. If you're like, yeah, I want to do it. No, I don't. Yeah, I want to do it. No, I don't. Yeah, I want to do it. I don't really have the energy for it. That's not a good invitation for you. Okay. Your desire to take that invitation has to stay consistent over the span of your wave. You will never have creative authority if you are a calibrator or a reflector.